Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to Interchange. Thank you so very much for joining us again. As is always the case, we have lots of interesting stuff to talk about today. Of course, we'll talk about Ryan Braun beating his suspension by Major League Baseball. We will talk about how Madison is handling the case of former associate athletic director, the one who allegedly abused and assaulted some undergrads. We'll talk about the giant mess the Wisconsin legislative redistricting has become. And we will talk about the taxpayer-funded party being planned for County Board Chairman Lee Holloway. All right, let me introduce everybody again. Again, we have Kevin Fischer, longtime broadcaster, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Talk Radio. And you know Denise Callaway, the community affairs and public relations professional. And Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. Of course, the first thing we're going to talk about is Ryan Braun becoming the first Major League Baseball player who appealed and won after being suspended by Major League Baseball for using a banned substance. Braun adamantly denies ever ingesting any banned substance, and Major League Baseball immediately expresses disappointment by saying Braun only won his case on a technicality because the urine sample wasn't stored and shipped to the lab properly. Boy, Kevin, I think Ryan Braun has a lot of reasons to complain about how he's been treated by Major League Baseball.
This has been a Major League botch job, but unfortunately for Ryan Braun, there's, I think, always going to be this cloud of doubt hanging over him because I submit we will never know what really happened. You know, initially he didn't challenge the results of the test. He challenged this chain of custody. And I think when the further you get away from Milwaukee Brewer fandom, it looks fishy. The rest of the country is saying, how come all these other previous ball players were suspended? The first one that was able to successfully appeal his suspension just happened to be on a star player on Bud Selig's team, the commissioner of baseball. Now look, the Courier, you can point fingers of blame at him that he didn't handle his job properly. He's from the Kenosha area. He's been doing this since 2005 for Major League Baseball. You would think he knows what he's doing and would not risk his career over this. Braun today said at his news conference that it's very easy to tamper with these samples. Experts who are being interviewed by the media say that's not true. It's very difficult to tamper with, and especially in this case where either the sample itself or another container that it was in had not one, not two, but 3 seals. It's bad for Ryan Braun because if he is innocent, I think he's going to have to, I mean, where do you go to get your reputation back? I think a lot of the country is saying that the fix was in and that he got off because of a technicality. It's bad for him. He won't get as many endorsements now. It's bad for Major League Baseball. It's bad for players. And it's unfortunate because maybe he is innocent. I don't think we'll ever really know the truth.
If you had the opportunity to watch his press conference, I think he comes across as extremely believable. Here's a guy who's done this test 25 sometimes, right, and he never had a problem before. All of a sudden, magically, he has the highest level ever of any test.
Ever. Yeah, I mean, it does sound really strange, but I think Kevin's right. The problem he's going to have is that he will never be able to definitively prove that he was telling the truth, that he is telling the truth, because of this whole question about the chain of command. I have to tell you, I think the disappointment that I have is in Major League Baseball. You know, if you take a look at the way that the system is supposed to work with 3 arbitrators, you know, the fix is already kind of in because you already know that Major League Baseball is always going to vote to uphold the suspension. Players Union is always going to vote to go along with the player. And then you have this third party who we expect to objectively take a look at the evidence. And there was great concern about the chain of command. And because that chain of command, or custody, thank you, because that chain of custody hadn't been followed, couldn't be verified, you know, this particular arbitrator felt that she didn't have a choice, had to go ahead and rule that because the chain of custody had been broken, that the suspension could not be upheld. But I think it's disappointing for Major League Baseball to so quickly and so strongly, you know, come out and say this was a technicality.
Because they know they've been under fire for this whole drug situation with Major League Baseball, that they have been lax for too long. Now they talk a good game about cleaning up their act, but now it looks like they still have work to do because their process is just botched.
When the process falls apart, then there isn't really a choice. You can't hold someone to that high of a level. If you take a look at the punishment he faced, it was incredible. A third of the season gone. When you have that kind of a significant question about, what did happen when, his sample was sitting in some guy's refrigerator for a couple of days, what did happen? You don't know. That's the reality.
That's a pretty loaded allegation that somebody tampered with the sample in that 44-hour window. If you're making that claim, you better have some proof, because that's pretty strong.
Know. And if you have to look at whether or not there's doubt as to whether or not, and you can say with any certainty that this sample went from where it was supposed to go to FedEx to the testing lab, and you have that clear chain of custody, then it's a whole different, pardon the pun, ball game than what you have right now. You can't have somebody's urine sitting in somebody's refrigerator for 2 days and say that everything was fine and you don't know that there was any.
And I don't think this is over. I wouldn't be at all surprised if Ryan Braun now sues Major League Baseball for screwing with his reputation.
I wouldn't be surprised either. I
think
employer
that pays.
Yes, absolutely, because
so
they make tons and tons and tons of money off of him. I think he was vindicated, and for those who had watched his remarks to his team, to the rest of the public at the news conference, I thought he was very compelling. He laid out point by point why he thought he was innocent. And anytime you have those kinds of samples outside of protected custody for 44 to 48 hours, anything can happen to it. Anyone that is intent on creating some type of disruption can somehow or the other make sure that disruption occurs. That part I do believe.
But why would somebody do
that? The issue is the motivation and of the person who was responsible. But let's talk about that person a little bit. Someone who was responsible for getting the sample in immediately. That was their job. They didn't do their job. They sat on top of a sample for far longer than they ever should have sat on top of it.
That's undeniable. But does that totally exonerate Braun?
Yes, I think it does, because if it had gotten to where it was supposed to have gotten to in the first place, we never would have known that it was Braun in the first place that was the subject of all of this.
There's another problem, this confidentiality matter, when they're leaking like sieves.
There was a
to the news
total breach of security in the entire process. And so for that reason alone, I think Major League Baseball should have given an apology, and they need to go back and correct their processes on all of this, because there's enough ammo for Braun to fire back at Major League Baseball.
And ESPN owes him an apology too. Not just for leaking this information, but then for leaking false information, claiming that he had this positive reading because he had an STD, a sexually transmitted disease, which, as he said today, isn't the case. There are a lot of apologies that need to go.
I don't agree, Denise, and you and I are former reporters. So is Dan. If somebody comes to you with this barn burner of a story that this tremendous baseball player has tested positive for an illegal drug, that reporter is going to run with that story.
Except in the old days when we were reporters and dinosaurs roamed the earth, you really had to be able to have two sources. You had to have two reliable sources that can tell you that information. Doesn't appear that was the case.
All right.
Nobody was as good as us.
As long as we're talking about sports, can we talk for a few minutes about John Chadima? He's the associate athletic director at the UW-Madison, who resigned after reports surfaced that he may have sexually harassed and abused some undergrads. Apparently, no one has come forward who wants to pursue charges, but you do have to wonder if the university is doing enough, Denise, to make sure that this kind of situation does not happen again. I found it all so very disappointing.
It's disappointing, and it is so disturbing that this is someone who had a history of this kind of behavior, rose in the ranks within the UW athletic department despite these problems, and then only when you have a student worker who comes forward with the abuse that happened to him, the assault that happened to him, does the rest of the stuff begin to unravel and we begin to hear what's going on about it? I think one of the problems is when you take a look at, in some ways, large major universities and their big athletic programs in some ways are not that different from professional sports in that there's a bit of insulation that tends to happen and to occur. And I think that's what happened here. You have this bad behavior. It's so insulated that there's no way perhaps for air to breathe on it and for people to realize what a rotten situation that it is. And you have things like this that occur. It's very disappointing that the university apparently didn't follow up when there was a problem, when Pat Richter was athletic director with some kind of reprimand in his file, that other students, and this is what concerns me so much as a parent, you have other students who through cell records we now know were contacted by him and told to show up in his room in the middle of the night, and something happened to the point where these students don't want to testify. And they don't want to talk about what happened.
You can't help but bring Penn State into the discussion because this came to light after the Penn State thing came to light, and you wonder, how can this happen at such a major university, and how can it happen on an ongoing basis, allegedly, and nobody knows about it?
Well, this is the difference between the Penn State case and the Madison case is Penn State was children being assaulted by an adult. In this case, you have adults that are involved, although one might say you have a supervisor versus employee kind of situation that's involved. And I do think that's why some of the other adults that were involved in this, other than Chadima, are not coming forward to talk, because now they have to open up their personal lives. And if they were involved in any kind of relationship willingly, then that's something that clearly they don't want to expose themselves to. In these cases, oftentimes, if you're going to pursue it and make a claim, you need an attorney. For those that are being questioned, some may feel that they need an attorney. There's cost that they never anticipated that's involved in this, simply because of the way the university has structured the investigation. So I do think there are going to be some people who are going to step back and not want to be involved in offering any kind of comment or testimony because they feel that it's going to expose their lives in ways unimaginable. Now, the way the university handled it overall, I think they were concerned that there may have been far more to it than just that one incident that took place out in California. And they really wanted to give folk the opportunity to come forward and offer their testimony if they felt that they too were in some manner harmed. The problem with that, Chadima came back actually with the retort that his character is now being assassinated because they're asking people to come forward and maybe make claims that just aren't true. And how does he deal with that? How does he deal with exposure that's unfair to him? So the back and forth is going to continue. There's going to be a lot more that will take place in the legal arena because some folk, I think, are going to actually file claims. And the university now is being very, very cautious because of the exposure that it has as the employer of record for someone who may have committed crimes.
And that program has a lot to lose, Kevin.
Yes, sports athletics is very important to not only that campus, but the entire UW system. I think the Penn State debacle, scandal, probably is a blessing in disguise because maybe had that not happened, we wouldn't be talking about this tonight. And it still might have been swept under the rug. I think the university is doing what it feels it can and should. The investigation has even gone into the text messages that he was sending back and forth to various students and people under his command. And there are going to have to be some changes. He's gone. That's good.
There was, they acted swiftly.
There was swift action there. The university did well there. But you can't have a person like that with alcohol in a hotel room with kids, and he swears the tax money wasn't used to purchase the alcohol. You can't have him, being in a position where he's having these people under his control going and getting his laundry and some of the other the tasks that he was doing. Right now, though, what can you do? You have people making allegations, but no, we don't want to file charges. He did this to me, but I don't want. So unless others come forward, it'll take one or two, and then I think it might steamroll, and you may have others, as you said, file lawsuits.
All right, next topic. What an unbelievable mess the Republican-controlled state legislature's attempt to redraw district lines has become. Of course, the party in control is going to try to draw lines in their favor. It happens all the time. And you would think, after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money to get it right, that they would get it right. But once again, it looks like the courts will have to make the final decisions. Now, you said you have to be careful about what you say.
Yes, I do. I've been involved in some of this, and it would probably be best if I not offered comments at this time.
Kevin, you worked in Madison a long time. Why is every state legislature in every state has to redraw the lines after every census? Why in Wisconsin does it always end up in the courts?
Because there's disagreement, because there's a lot at stake. This is partisan politics. And it doesn't matter how the lines are drawn, even if they are constitutional, even if they are fair, even if it is done properly, even if there is fair representation as far as number of people in each assembly and state senate district. There's going to be a complaint raised. Now, in this case, I find it interesting that a local Latino organization is claiming that the lines have been drawn unfairly, when it was argued in court this week that because of the new redistricting lines, Latinos will now have representation and strong representation, if you look at population, in not one state assembly district, but two. I think there's I hate to bring in partisan politics here, but there is a faction that wants to undo the elections of November 2010. They didn't get the governor's mansion, we're going to have a recall. They want to flip one of the houses of the legislature, we're going to have state senate recalls. We don't like the way the lines are redrawn, so we're going to sue and go to court. This is what happens every 10 years. And if the tables were reversed and Democrats controlled everything, they'd be redrawing the lines. It's unfortunate that we can't. Let me say this about the process. These judges don't want it to be in the courts. They'd rather have the lawmakers figure it out. But because of the climate, I think, in Madison, the way it is right now, it is so poisonous. The chasm is so wide that the Democrats and Republicans are not going to agree on these lines. But in the end, it's not the process. I know Denise, you're going to bring up that stuff was done behind closed doors.
It was.
And all these other matters. In the end, and I've been in politics a long time, generally speaking, people don't care about process, they care about the results. And in this case, it's the maps. Are the maps fair? Do they give everybody equal representation? Are they fair? And I think they are.
But should it be more transparent?
It should be more transparent, but there is also fault in the maps. So let's talk about the transparency issue first. When you take a look at the documents that the federal judge forced Republicans to reveal, it showed that there was a veil of secrecy that was put in place around this whole process, where they specifically went to private attorneys as a way to try to create a attorney-client privilege that would not allow some documents to be released. And the judge actually called that whole effort shameful in terms of the efforts that were made there. You also have a case where Republicans were told, again, in documents that were released by the court, to ignore any of the public comments that people made when they disagreed with the maps. And there are problems with the maps around representation. Voices de la Frontera decided that it wanted to be part of this because it did see an erosion in what was happening in the 8th and the 9th Assembly districts. And if you take a look at what the new 8th Assembly district looks like under the Republican map, it does make a significant difference in the Latino population that is there. In fact, what they did was to move out about 22,000 Latinos out of that area and move 22,000 non-Latinos in. It does make a difference in this. It does dilute the representation that the Latino community has. But beyond that, it's just a bad way to go through this process. Yes, we do find that it seems like the courts are the ones who make decisions about how the redistricting goes in this state, maybe more than others, and who knows why. But in this case, it's ended up in court because there wasn't that transparency. There wasn't that opportunity. There wasn't an opportunity for people to really give feedback on what was taking place. So, I mean, that's the reason. It's shameful. And the thing that's even worse about that is we will spend about $1.3 million kind of defending this process.
So now you're a fiscal conservative.
What I'm saying is, how can we say that, you know, we've got this deficit in the state that we absolutely have to deal with, but, you know, we're authorizing spending, you know, over $1.3 million to address this issue.
The claim by the plaintiffs is that their constitutional rights have been taken away. That's preposterous.
All right, let's just touch on outgoing Milwaukee County Board Chairman Lee Holloway for just a minute. Back in the news because one of his supporters said to all the county supervisors, why don't you toss in $100 out of your office fund to contribute to the Black History Month celebration where we're going to honor Holloway. And oh, that turns into a big story. You can talk about this one, right?
I can talk about this one. You know, I don't know how this thing exploded the way that it has, other than perhaps some supervisors balked at wanting to contribute money to what began as an innocent enough tribute to Black history. And the thinking was, why not honor then one of the county's most prominent politicians, Lee Holloway? Whether you like him or not, he was the first African-American county board chairman, and he was the first African-American to hold the position, whether interim or otherwise, of county executive. So the tribute was to be innocent enough for Black History Month, and the tribute to him was to be innocent enough. And I suppose that if it was not he that was going to be honored, there probably wouldn't have been any stink about this at all.
But 30 seconds, $2,000 for a party?
Going to be a good party, I guess. You know, I think to be honest, you know,
$2,000 of taxpayer money for a party.
$2,000 of taxpayer money. I think we would have been in much better shape if the supervisors would have just thrown in $100 of their own money, and it just would have been over with.
Volunteer. Pull out your own checkbook. Yeah, Lee, you're worth $100 of mine. Here you go. But
I think if they had asked for that, if they'd asked for personal contributions, they would have gotten it.
Not the way Lee Holloway has run that board. I think a lot of them would have said, I'm sorry, you're not getting any of my money.
Might have been a $200 party. Well, it was a surprise of the TV season, and it looks as if it's finally coming to an end. Who'd have thought that a bunch of people standing or sitting side by side and answering questions would be must-see TV? But our own TV reviewer, writing consultant, and commentator Rick Horowitz couldn't tear himself away. Rick.
Just call me a glutton for punishment. There were 20 Republican presidential debates this time around. I think I watched 18 of them. Like I said, a glutton. Or you can call me a concerned citizen. And after watching all those hours over all those months, I'm even more concerned. I'm also less concerned. More concerned that one of America's two major political parties, a party with a long and historic tradition, this is the best they could come up with. And more concerned when I contemplate any of these last four contestants actually sitting in the Oval Office. But less concerned that that'll ever happen. Which isn't to say, not at all, that I think this election is a done deal. There are any number of things that can keep Barack Obama from being reelected. If he gets blamed for high gas prices, or the economy stalls out again, or there's a sudden scandal or a big new crisis somewhere in the world, another war or earthquake or nuclear meltdown, any of those could happen. Not especially likely, but they could happen. But what's totally unlikely after all these debates is that the American people will look at Santorum or Romney or Gingrich or Paul and say, wow, that guy's got some really well thought out ideas for dealing with this complicated world we live in. Or, gee, I really want that guy making important decisions for me and my family for the next 4 years. That's not going to happen. In fact, the more these guys talked and argued with each other, the more they tried to outright wing each other, the more damage they did to each other and to themselves. I half expected on Wednesday night, when John King announced that this might be the last debate of the primary season, for the White House to call over to CNN and say, hey, can we buy them another hour? Let them keep talking. Meanwhile, you can be sure that everything these guys have already said, every line, every word, has been carefully recorded by the Obama folks. It's been cataloged and cross-indexed, and it's ready to be deployed for maximum effect when the time comes. I don't know which one of these four eventually staggers across the finish line and gets the Republican nomination, but I already know his running mate's name, TiVo.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.